Hello and welcome to another episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Today, however, I am doing a Dinky. It is the Harrier aircraft number 722, and this model came out in 1971. These aircraft were quite unusual in that they could take off and land vertically. In actual fact, they were nicknamed the Harrier Jump Jet. They saw service with the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, the Indian Navy, and most recently, the United States Marine Corps. So these first flew in 1967, so they're quite an old aircraft, and yet they are rather unique in that they can take off and land vertically. They're designated as VSTOL, that means vertical and short takeoff and landing. Unfortunately, they are going to be phased out and replaced by the F-35 Lightning, which is designated as STOVL, which means short takeoff, vertical landing. So slightly different in that it needs a bit of a runway to take off when it's fully equipped with all of its weapons. This model has a few unique features in that it has a retractable undercarriage and rotating exhaust nozzles on the sides of the fuselage. They are controlled by a switch on the centre of the top of the fuselage. It also has a couple of plastic outriggers that can be rotated down so that it can remain on static display on a desk, for example, without it falling over sideways. This one has been played to death, so I'm going to take it apart and try and fix it up so it looks like new again. This model is very easy to disassemble. There are no rivets, there are just two flat-bladed screws holding this thing together. One at the rear and one at the front. I'm very carefully pulling this apart because I'm not too sure which bits are going to fly out, whether there's any springs or any other bits or pieces that might get lost. My first impressions are that this front nose wheel assembly is in good condition, and I think I might just leave that as is because it looks very complicated. This little silver sliding bar is what operates the function of the undercarriage and the rotating exhaust nozzles. Unfortunately for me, this rear undercarriage assembly is broken. As you can see, one of the exhaust outlets is completely missing. Interesting that Dinky used stickers for this model rather than decals. So hopefully I'll be able to replicate those using some sticker type material. Anyway, now I've pulled all the bits, I'm just making sure I haven't lost anything. So before I start, I shall make up this accurate depiction of the stickers to enable me to replicate them later on using PaintShop Pro. So using my vernier calipers here, I am noting down all the measurements of the various stickers. To assist me when I replicate them later on in this video. I'm just picking the old stickers off here with my thumbnail, and well, actually I use a little scalpel here to get under the edge there to reveal how these outriggers are attached. Now it's a very shallow rivet there, which I am reluctant to remove as I don't think I can replicate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave these outriggers on here, and I'm just going to mask them off when I respray the model and try to keep them 100% original. Somewhat annoyingly, this aircraft is missing a canopy and also a pilot. So I thought I might have a shot at vacuum forming my own cockpit canopy. So to do that, I first need to make a dummy cockpit over which I can vacuum form the clear plastic. So I'm using this polymer repair compound called Need It by Sally's. It's the first time I've used it, so I have no idea how good it is or what it's going to turn out like. It's a two-part resin type thing where you cut off a piece of this sausage, however much you need. It's got a plastic sheath over it to keep it fresh, I guess. And then what you do is you knead it between your fingers and thumbs until it's all one uniform colour. So as you can see, it's dark grey and light grey. And once you start mixing it together, it starts to turn into a light grey. A lighter grey, I should say. I've probably mixed up a little bit too much here, but good to have too much rather than too little, I guess. Just moulding it with my fingers here around the canopy section, around the cockpit, using a lolly stick there to try and blend it into shape. Just sand it down smooth with some files and some sandpaper. So what I'm hoping to do is to use this as a mould to vacuum form some clear plastic sheeting over the top of it and make a replica canopy. I do have one on order, but I fear that because of this coronavirus thing that's going on, the postage is so slow that it will not arrive in time for the grand reveal of this model. So I'm quite pleased with how that's turned out, and I'm optimistic that I can recreate a canopy. However, it's not as easy as you might think. I've seen all the videos, but I have been unable to source the correct type of plastic. So I've basically been experimenting with all different types. Anything I can get my hands on, such as like a pack of donuts, the clear plastic package it comes in. And here, this is a tabletop cover that's 0.7 millimeters thick. It's quite hard plastic, designed to preserve your dining room table. You buy it on the roll. I thought maybe this will do, so I heated up with this heat gun, and with the assistance of an assistant, try and stretch it over the mould that I've made. Here is my attempt at the Mark 1 vacuum forming station that I made. It's made from some picture frames, and I stick my vacuum cleaner nozzle in the end there and suck it down. But again, it's all reliant on the fact that you can get the correct sheets of thermoplastic, whatever it's called, I'm not too sure. It's the plastic sheet that melts when you heat it up, and you can use it to form things. So far, I have not been able to source any. So I guess I can say I'm on the road to failure here. Anyway, moving on, I have this little metal figure. I think he's out of a racing car, and I'm just grinding him down so he can fit in the cockpit. By the way, if the pilot is a man, they call it the cockpit, and if it's a female pilot, they call it the box office. It's still a little bit too big to fit in the cockpit, so I just grind his size down a little bit more, and there he is. He looks quite good in there. I do actually sand down his helmet a little bit because it seems a little bit big, and at the end I think you'll see he looks okay. Now here I am designing the roundels, the RAF roundels, that's what those circular stickers are called. I'm printing them out on Avery package labels because Dinky used stickers, so I'm basically trying to replicate them. As for the broken exhaust nozzle, I grabbed a bolt out of my shed and ground it down using my grindstone and some files. To try and make it look the same as the other side, the side that's not missing. So there is a square shank and a circular shaft with a flat engraved on it. So it took me a little while to work it out. I'm using a tiny little pin here to try and lock it together. I'm going to glue that in that hole, and then I'm going to glue this bolt onto the pin. So it should be pretty solid. And I've also got to try and make a exhaust nozzle from scratch, which I've never done before. So once I've got these profiles as close as I can get, I'm now cutting it to length. And I do a test fit there, and I'm quite happy with how that's turning out. So I'm using some more of that kneaded 2-part putty to make a mould into which I can cast a new exhaust nozzle. Well, that is my hope. And I'm going to cast it using some lead that I have in my shed that is left over from when I did some LED lighting on my front door. These strips I cut down into little chunks so that I can melt them in this ladle over my gas cooker. First time I've done this, so I'm quite excited, testing out a new technique. So I found this ladle in the kitchen there, in the utensils jar, and I've modified it so it's got a little spout for pouring the molten lead out of. And I've also put a dog leg in the handle so it's easier to hold over the flame. Now this lead really went, when it started to melt, it melted real quick. All of a sudden I got this beautiful silver liquid in which to cast the replacement parts. So I've done 2 here, so hopefully 1 out of the 2 will be good. After it's cooled, I just upend it onto this metal sheet. I'm very, very impressed and pleased with the outcome. Anyway, just to mix it up a little bit, I thought I'd try some of this air dry clay. Maybe this might make for a better mould, I don't know. I'm still experimenting, but I hope you're enjoying it and maybe learning something from my experience. So I just squeeze a lump of this clay off and pack it into these little paint pots that I've got. And here I am now forming a second mould. Hopefully it's slightly better than the first one I did. Anyway, at the end of this I'll have 4 different nozzles and I'll be able to pick the best one to replace the missing one on the model. Now, looking at these here, I think the one on the far left is the best one of the batch. So that's the one I'm going with. I just have to sand it down a little bit to try and make it in the correct dimensions as the original and take off all that excess flashing around it. And then I araldite it onto my modified bolt that I've made, and I'm hopeful that it's going to work. This blue colour paint on the aircraft is very unusual, and it takes me a little bit of effort to make it up. I used the silver, the sky blue and the dark blue, blend it all together, and I come up with something very similar to what I'm after. As a test, I spray the underbody of the fuselage and then compare it with the upper surface before I strip it. It turned out not too bad. As for the green camouflage, I'm using this Mr. Hobby number 340, and it is a perfect match. So I guess you could say I'm happy with that. Anyway, the base should be white, so I shall be painting that white later. But before then, of course, I've got to strip off all of the old paint. So I'll do that now. Now this paint reacted really well to the paint stripper. It's the polish stripper paint stripper gel that I use. And check this out. It almost came off like a glove off of a hand. It's kind of like skinning a rabbit. It all comes off almost in one piece. I must admit that stripping the paint off like this is so satisfying, and it makes me feel good. These holes here are for an original canopy. Well, as I said before, I've got one on order, but I don't think it's going to get here on time. So I'm going to fill these holes in, and in the future, when my original looking canopy arrives, I shall pick these holes out and refit it. But I could not show this model off at the end with some holes in the front, so I decided to fill them. So I'll just set that aside for an hour or so to go off. And when it's set, I just sand it back smooth with the rest of the fuselage. And as I said, when I get my new canopy for this, I can just push those holes through, I'm sure. I'm using some frog tape here. It's a masking tape. It's quite a good one. And it's green for whatever reason. It sets it apart from the rest of them. And I've just masked off that front undercarriage section, so when I paint the base it doesn't get covered in white paint. For the outrigger attachment points, I'm also using some frog tape, and I'm masking them off quite carefully all the way around. And after I've painted this, I shall peel this off, and hopefully it will look all original again. So first time in the spray booth here, and what I'm doing is something different. I'm giving this model a coat of some silver paint out of a pressure pack or a rattle can, whatever you call it. So I'm using this as an undercoat rather than the normal grey primer that I use. The original reason was because I'm going to be putting a metallic finish on the upper body of the fuselage, so I felt that maybe an aluminium type spray paint might be a good undercoat. I also did it on the underbelly of the fuselage here. Probably needn't have bothered because that's going to be white anyway. Here's a close-up of some of the details on this model. I guess it's like the real aircraft. It's quite clean in its appearances with very little sort of protrusions on the fuselage there. So here's this paint I mixed up. It did settle in its different levels there, so I had to give it a bit of a mix before I could use it. And I'm spraying it on to the silver undercoat that I put on. It looks a little bit light, and I'm not too impressed, so I actually do this quite a few times until I get to where I want to be. And I add a little bit more dark blue to the light blue to get the finished result that hopefully looks very, very similar to the original model when it first came out. Now I'm using the Tamiya gloss white for the underside. Some people say it's grey, but to my mind it looked white. So whether these came out with light grey underbellies and white underbellies, I don't know, but my one looked white, so I've replaced it with the white paint. Here's that Avery stickers, and I stuck it in my printer the wrong way round initially, so I printed on the back of it, but I redid it and printed on the front. Now I've cut them out with my guillotine, and I'm just sealing the ink in there with a little bit of this Tamiya gloss spray, gloss varnish. Now I've printed out a picture that I took of the original model before I stripped it, so I can get the camouflage effect as close as possible to what it looked like when it came out the factory. Now this is a mistake I made. I used this red texture just to roughly mark out where the green sections were, the camouflage sections. I think I did quite a good job of marking it out and matching it up to the original. Unfortunately, as you will see, after I paint it green, the red texture shows through. And I was very, very disappointed because this took me a couple of days to get to this stage. And I was really excited at this moment in time, thinking this is going to look so cool. I'm using low pressure and close range, so there's minimal overspray around the edges. Before I started, I noted that the camouflage looked like it had been stenciled on, and there was a little bit of overspray from the factory. But this is why I was annoyed. You could see the red texture marks through the paint. So I had to strip it back and go again, which set me back another day. Now I've put these parts back in here, and I'm trying to work out how it works. Now, when you retract the undercarriage and release it, the undercarriage redeploys. So I'm guessing there is something missing from this model. Some form of spring that would push this sliding piece up to engage in those recesses in the top of the fuselage. And that would lock it into position either fore or aft, according to whether the undercarriage was up or down. So I struggle for a solution. I attempt to use springs and rubber washers and even like a little piece of sprung steel there. Could not get it to work. I even tried a strip of flexible plastic as a spring, but I couldn't get it to work. Anyway, eventually I come up with an idea. I went out to my shed, I got my little tray of O-rings and brought them inside. And I found two, only two mind you, tiny little rubber O-rings. And it's strange how things work out, because I needed two and there was two, and they work absolutely perfectly in that they provide a tiny amount of spring pressure. When this model is screwed back together, they actually force that sliding lever up and it engages with the slots in the underside of the wing. so that the undercarriage does not self-retract when the weight of the model is on the ground. So that's just one of those weird things that worked out for me, and no one will know because they're hidden on the inside of the fuselage. I've since found out there should be a spring steel piece that sits in there, but maybe one day I'll make a spring steel piece and replace it. Now the nose here is off of a model Jaguar that somebody sent me, so I robbed that just for the sake of completing this model on time. Here's the little pilot figure. I've sprayed him matte black or satin black, and on some of the pictures I look on the internet, it looks like his face is painted pink. There's not much detail on him at all, so I thought I'll just do that, paint his face a little bit pink using a drop of this fellatio paint. And I thought, oh, that looks good. But then when you look up close, it looks absolutely atrocious. He's got no nose, and he's got a hole in his chest like he's been shot through the heart. However, no one will know because he's going to be in that cockpit and hidden behind glass. And no one's going to scrutinise this model that much, I'm sure. So I've printed these roundels out, and when I cut them out, despite my best efforts, there is a very white sort of edge to the sticker material that I'm using. So I went out and bought these Sharpies. I used a blue one to go around the outside of the roundels, just to disguise that white cut edge. And surprisingly, they look really cool. It's a very subtle sort of highlight around the circumference of the blue section on these stickers. It kind of gives them like a 3D effect. I'm really quite happy with how they turned out. They look really nice. The underside here, there's you can't go wrong. There's circles cast in the wing there where they fit. And this little model man here, the pilot, I'm going to glue him in there. And that's pretty much this makeover's done. Although I did have to make some stickers for the tail. I forgot to show that, and I put them in. The very last thing I did was put those stickers in. So anyway, this is what we started with. Pretty grotty looking model. Played to death. And this is what it looks like now. I can't wait to get that replica canopy, because that is going to finish this model off beautifully. As it is a work of art. I love this model. I actually believe I had one of these as a kid. And it has brought back some fantastic memories for me. And I hope it's brought back some fantastic memories for you. And I apologise for it not being a Matchbox, but occasionally I just lose the plot and think I need to do this. And this model was one of those models that I needed to do. I looked at it every day and thought, I've just got to try and do a makeover on that because it's such a gorgeous model. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe. And tell your friends to check out Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. So until next time, this is Marty from Marty's Matchbox Makeovers saying goodbye and thanks for watching. This is not good. I don't know what to do. Oh,
it's sort of getting there, look.